Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the different interpretations of different symbols that have existed in the history of the feminist movement, right? We assess Savita Bhabhi not only because it has become extremely popular, but because we have found certain flaws in which this mascot is used and projected, right? And we have a problem with why we have a problem with her being appropriated as the woman next door, right? So in the course of my speech, I will tell you about why Savita Bhabhi in the first place gained wide acclaim. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about what, because this is a graphic novel, it has a certain trajectory that is being followed, has a specific context that we disagree with and do not want to appropriate. Third, I'm going to talk to you about why even, despite being this woman who seems to be owning her sexuality, she shows a lot of conformity with social problems, right? And then I'm going to talk to you about the nature of sex that is shown in this particular pornographic medium, right? And then I'm going to talk to you about how a hypersexualized woman is also an objectified woman, right? To start with, when is it that Savita Bhabhi gained wide acclaim, right? It's when magazines like Tehelka, other newspapers suddenly discovered that here is some Indian porn, right? And this seems to be great, right? There's a woman in a sari who seems to be sexually licentious and seems to be really happy doing so, right? Therefore, when we don't want to promote it, we will be using the same media to condemn this sort of porn, right? And now, why is it that we say so, right? We think just because she is dressed in a sari doesn't make her the woman next door, right? Doesn't mean that we want to necessarily appropriate her. Why is that? Because this is a graphic novel, there's a backstory that comes with it, right? Savita Bhabhi is married to a man called Ashok. She's in an unhappy marriage. Despite all of her sexual adventures, she stays in that unhappy marriage, right? We don't think she's doing enough to be able to get out of this arranged marriage that she was pushed into, right? So that's one thing. We don't necessarily think that signifies liberation in the first place, right? Let's also talk about what she does, right? She has been using sexual favors. She has been using her sexuality as a resource to get ahead in her career, right? To be able to pass school in the first place, right? We think that reinforces stereotypes about women just being able to use their sexuality to do good in any dimension of life altogether. Just think about it. She's also a secretary. What worse stereotype can you use when you talk about jobs meant for women and how they get those jobs? Secretaries are typified, one of those professions that are typified immediately about whether you can keep your boss happy by doing sexual favors for her, right? We have a problem with that because she is now using her sexuality as a resource to get ahead in everything and not necessarily just being great in the bedroom, right? And therefore we don't think she's an appropriate model for the feminist movement, right? We also spoke about why she stays in this sort of marriage, right? And then think about it this way, she's hypersexualized. She has sex with anything that moves, right? She goes ahead and just seduces any man that she looks at, right? We think this hypersexualization is a problem, right? Because we think that even after she has done that, right? And if you are avid readers of Savita Bhabhi, you will know this. Even after she has seduced that man, when they finally get to the sex part of it, she has this victimized expression on her face, right? We think the graphic representation of Savita Bhabhi is also problematic because then she looks like, oh my god, what did I bring upon myself? Even when they're doing sex, right? She doesn't ever get oral pleasure, right? She's only giving that sort of pleasure to men. So we don't think that changes the dynamics of how Indian men and women think about what a good, healthy, equal sexual relationship is in the first place. And hence we don't think this necessarily stands for, not right now, stands for sexual liberation, right? Let's also talk about this, right? How is it that her body has been constructed as a character in this particular porn, right? She has extremely exaggerated sexual body parts, right? We think that's also something that's necessarily phallocentric. So if you read about Mahashweta Devi's breast stories, right? Those protagonists have really big breasts, right? And therefore they are protagonists. We think a woman who is only being identified by sexually attractive by virtue of what the structure of her body is also makes it phallocentric because then it becomes part of the male fantasy. And hence we say that this woman next door is not just any woman next door, right? It's a male fantasy of what they want the woman next door to be. And hence we think this is not something that's doing much for how women envision their sexual relationships with other people, how women feel adequate or inadequate in terms of their body images, because this is a typified body image that is being used and is being which is being ascribed this sort of sexual licentiousness in the first place, right? Let's also talk about this, right? She's covertly going ahead and having these sexual adventures, right? We don't necessarily, in a minute, we don't necessarily think that this stands for sexual liberation. Go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am, do you think it's important for the feminist movement to promote any kind of porn?
We think the feminist movement should promote that sort of porn that necessarily goes ahead and tackles the kinds of stereotypes that Savita Bhabhi seems to be enforcing, right? We think that those stereotypes that we're talking about are stereotypes that Indian men and women also easily buy into, right? Women only using their sexuality to be able to pass out of school by like giving sexual favors, doing sexual favors for their professors, women being able to get jobs through sexual favors and not having any other capability in general, right? We think the moment we have pornography, which has women who might be of any shape and size and not necessarily attractive, with almost zero breasts, right? We think those are the kinds of mascots that we can use. Just because Savita Bhabhi has happened to become popular is no reason why we should necessarily go ahead and appropriate her, right? It just received wide acclaim, and we think either A, that's incidental and that does not make it enough reason for us to go ahead and appropriate her, or B, we think that's because it conforms so easily to male stereotypes and male fantasies and doesn't really challenge them, that it has gained this sort of wider readership in a whatever, like sexually regressive society like India, right? And hence we don't think that just because she happens to be popular, the feminist movement should unquestionably go ahead and appropriate her for this, right? We told you that hypersexualized women are male fantasies because that's also showing that women, like the concept of consent goes away there as well, right? Because it seems like this woman is always ready to have sex. Where does the picture of consent come into place, right? And consent is something that the feminist movement has been harping about for many, many years, right? And we don't want this to be undervalued either by saying, hey, like, you know, that's the stereotype. If you're saying no, you mean yes. Here is a woman who never even like assesses this judgment, right? She never even goes ahead and tries to think about whether she wants to say yes or no. She's just always ready for this. Hence, she's a hypersexualized woman. She's a male fantasy, right? And hence, we think that it takes away from the kind of individuality, rationality that we have been trying to convince people about, that women actually do go ahead and possess, right? And hence, we think if the feminist movement publicly goes and says, hey, this is the kind of porn that we like, right? And it just happens to be so much in conformity with male fantasies, all of which think that women are passive sexual partners, all of which think that women don't think about the kind of sexual relationships that they want to have, they're just always ready with it. We think that's going to be hugely detrimental to the feminist movement, right? So what all did we talk to you about? We told you that the context and conformity of certain social institutions in the trajectory of this graphic novel make it extremely problematic. We told you that the graphic nature of this, right, the kind of expression she has while she's having sex, her body structure, all of those things also make it stereotypical. How every other dimension of her life is also undervalued, that makes her a hypersexualized woman, makes her a bad mascot. Hence, we're very proud to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, to judge Savita Bhabhi, you necessarily have to understand the context in which she's operating, as Riya's rightly pointed out, right? But we don't think our understanding of what that context is the same as theirs, right? Here's a couple of things we want to challenge them on. Firstly, this idea of an unhappy marriage and how she's like this really downtrodden woman and she like hates her life, but she cannot leave, so like she does these things covertly. No, we don't think this is true, right? We think she loves Ashok, right? But he's not really good in bed. So what she chooses to do is, albeit like covertly, right, go and have sex with other men on the side, right? We think that she chooses to do this covertly, sure, right? But she isn't downtrodden in that relationship, and more importantly, in her sexual relationships with other men, we don't think she's downtrodden. So like one fact clash, we don't think that men don't go down on her, we think they do. We think she has sex with like other women, we think she has sex with like all sorts of partners, and we don't necessarily see therefore how this is this like heteronormative man on top kind of porn that Riya seems to think that it is. What her job is, right, is suddenly very, very important. And here's the thing, we don't think that Savita Bhabhi's entire story is, oh, she has sex, then she gets a job, then she has sex, then she gets a better job, then she has sex, then she gets another job. Sure, in some cases she gets some advantages because she has sex with people, right? But we think the context in which she has sex with other people vary hugely, right? And here's the thing, we think more importantly, what Savita Bhabhi does is have sex for her own pleasure. And this is what we're going to emphasize. We look at a woman who sure is hypersexual in a certain sense, right? But does it because she thinks that she wants sex in a certain thing. And we think it's extremely regressive rather for the feminist movement under Riya, right, to come up and tell us that a woman cannot possibly want to have sex with lots of men because, hey, that's possibly also like a male fantasy, so therefore we cannot conform to that, so we have to conform by not conforming, right? We think that's a really, really fucked up thing to do. We think if she prioritizes sex in a certain way and gets favors in certain ways and gives favors in certain ways, we think that's an okay prioritization to make. And this is the thing, we think the problem with the contemporary porn industry is that it's always women having sex for men's pleasure, and the idea in Indian society of a woman wanting to have sex with multiple partners, right, and wanting to break down these norms of, oh, you're in a marriage, or oh, you're of a certain age, and therefore these sexual desires go away, right? We think that's something that needs to be broken down. We don't think Savita Bhabhi walks around on the streets and like men proposition her, and the moment like any man comes up to her, she's like, yeah, okay, I don't really feel comfortable, but I'm going to like make a victim face and have sex with you, right? We think she chooses men, and sure, she chooses them more loosely than some of us would, but we think that's an okay thing to do. We do not see why promiscuity, simply because some men may like it, is suddenly an illegitimate lifestyle choice for women to be making. We think rather, when you come up and say, condemn Savita Bhabhi, because we think this is something they've left entirely unaddressed. What you say is that promiscuous woman is a woman who is a bad woman, right? And we think there is more than enough discourse in the public forum right now from right-wing groups like our lovely RSS, right? That constantly comes up and tells us that promiscuous women are terrible women and need to be shunned. As a feminist movement, we need to oppose this wave constantly, right? And we think the moment we buy into this, right, we let it snowball into this like weird, appeasing like mechanism where we constantly sit down, right? Support the very people that we're constantly trying to break down. Here's the thing, we think Savita Bhabhi is to a lot of extent the woman next door in terms of being, say, racially or culturally similar to us, and we think this is extremely important. Because here's the thing, how is female sexuality repressed in Indian society constantly? By talking about the loose woman as the western woman, as the outside woman, as the woman who is necessarily culturally distant from you, because of course she doesn't have sanskar, because like white skin, how will sanskar come, right? So here's the thing, right, we think it's important to create these figures within porn, because here comes up and tells you that hey, we think a certain kind of porn should be promoted, right? And we think necessarily, of course, Savita Bhabhi will do certain things that you may not be okay with, right? Sure, as a woman I may differ in the opinion of how promiscuous a woman should be, but we don't see these issues as being large enough for you to come up and support this kind of rhetoric of hey, if you're promiscuous, you're definitely not feminist in that sense. We think that's something that we really don't want to do. Exaggerated body type, right? Sure, Savita Bhabhi has certain attributes which we think are important in terms of she appeals to a certain audience, right? And we think that's important again, because here's the thing, you cannot from the ground up construct a base of people who will listen to your ideas if the porn that you give them has no connect with the porn that they are familiar with or that they desire at all. So sure, does Savita Bhabhi do certain things that tap into expectations of women's bodies? Sure she does, but at the same time, and this is important, right? Karthik tells me she has a really close friend who she has sex with who has like tiny tits, right? So we don't think like these alternate figures aren't provided within Savita Bhabhi, right? And we think therefore it is constantly challenging the idea that a sexually promiscuous woman necessarily also needs to have large tits. Yes, we had to choose like a body type when we chose one character. Okay, fine, she has big tits. We don't think we didn't provide you with alternative figures. Yes.
Ma'am, do you think this body structure, having sex with the boss, all of those things are incidental and don't conglomerate into a larger stereotype?
Here's the thing, we think anything that you do, if you are too loose, you are seen as a certain kind of woman, right? If you are too like you don't have sex with a lot of men, you're seen as this cold, frigid bitch, right? So we think either decision that you make is always going to be one that's judged in a certain way and sure can be looked at as affirming a certain kind of male stereotype, right? It's the idea of do you dress conservatively because you think if you show your tits, men will like you and therefore you should not do that? Or do you choose at some point to let go of that and stop thinking about precisely what men are going to think at every single point when you make a decision? Here's the thing, we think constantly in our society, women are not seen as sexual agents. We think Savita Bhabhi breaks down that divide, right? She constantly shows herself as a woman who aggressively demands certain sexual sort of favors, certain sexual situations which are to her advantage, to her choosing. We do not think she's submissive, right? And apart from saying she makes a weird face like Riya really hasn't provided you with any justification of why she's not, right? We think this woman, while being in a relationship, choosing to have sex with other men, right? Choosing to have sex with other women, right? Shows you a diversity of sexual experiences. And of course, given that she's having so much sex, some of that sex is going to be within the radar of heteronormativity, right? We don't think that disallows the vast other portion that constantly breaks down heteronormativity as it exists. Here's the thing, the promiscuous and immodest woman is something that is censured in society as men are not, right? We don't think the promiscuous man is looked at as a disgusting figure, right? So we don't think inherently in this society there is a certain amount of shunning for promiscuity. We think porn therefore is the one avenue through which we constantly challenge this narrative. Because of course, as we've multiple times heard, right? The idea that it's introduced to you at a pivotal pace, the idea that it's so popular and spread so widely, and Savita Bhabhi has a huge fan base, right? The idea idea that you break from the norm of a certain kind of porn by reaching that vast audience at say 13 and telling them this is an alternative figure is really, really important. We think when you actively promote Savita Bhabhi, you provide this platform on which to incentivize the making of a certain kind of porn, right? Because we think the endorsement of the feminist movement means a lot. So we think the only way we're going to be able to build up a fan base is A, if we take something that already has traction and then incentivize other figures which are similar. We're not saying we won't critique Savita Bhabhi to a certain extent, right? When we say lend support to comrades in other groups, we don't buy that wholesale and say that their policies don't have certain flaws, right? So we don't think that criticism is going to go away. But when you disengage from that, when you say I will not support Savita Bhabhi, inherently what you do is buy into this larger prevalent mindset and this signaling that a promiscuous woman is a bad woman, and we think that's a terrible, terrible thing for them to have argued and for the feminist movement to come and do that. We think we need to break down the binary that exists that tells you that women of a certain age and within certain constructs cannot be sexually promiscuous. Because here's the thing, right? We think that the feminist movement has spoken to young women, right? It has spoken to women in colleges. But the idea is that breaks down constantly when you're told at 30 now you're certainly sexually dead. We think Savita Bhabhi is pivotal in that sense. We think we need to promote her with that vehemence.
Right. So ladies and gentlemen, Avni has come up here and basically tried to corner us into this place where we have to admit to the fact that either Savita Bhabhi is promiscuous, alright, and we're buying into a binary as she proposes, or that we're going ahead and re-entrenching these ideas in society where a promiscuous woman was a loose woman who's a bad woman, alright. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the moment Avni comes up here and tells us that we want a middle ground, alright, we tell you this is not the middle ground she talks about, alright. And what is the alternative she talks about, alright? She talks about this binary herself, alright, where she talks about either frigidity, alright, or a loose woman, alright. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there is a middle ground, but this is not the middle ground that we talk about, right? And this is where my rebuttals begin, alright. She comes up here and talks to me about how she is not a downtrodden woman, alright, because now she is going ahead and exercising her consent in like sleeping with predictable men, alright. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the fact of the matter is that Savita Bhabhi, as per the context, is not choosing the kind of men she sleeps with, alright. Anything that walks through her door, alright, and it's an accident of chance, alright, is something that she gets into bed with, alright. And we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because if you're not exhibiting consent in even, or if you're not like selecting people out of what walks through your door, alright, you're essentially just not giving consent at all, alright. Your consent does not hold true here because you're just basically sleeping with anything that comes into your contact by an accident of chance, alright. And we find this extremely problematic, alright. She's also, sorry. We also find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because we told you that she is stuck in a marriage with Ashok, alright. And Avni comes and tries to challenge it by virtue of saying, no, she loves Ashok, and that is why she's still with Ashok, alright. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the fact of the matter is that despite the fact that Ashok, as Avni told you, is not sexually pleasing her, alright, her husband, I mean, she continues to stay in this marriage, alright, and we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because the feminist movement since times immemorial has tried to put this idea forward about how women need to break societal constructs which are holding them down, alright, and we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because of an arranged marriage which is bogging her down, which is not providing her sexual pleasure. She's still not going out of this marriage, but she continues to have sexual intercourse with people covertly despite being stuck in this marriage, alright. Now about this entire concept of having sexual intercourse covertly, alright, we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if this graphic novel was such a idea of, was actually putting forward this idea of liberation that Avni is trying to pull to us, right? Yeah.
Why do you think it's liberating to promote the idea that a woman's husband is the only person from whom she must get both sexual pleasure and emotional support, and to exist in a system outside of that is somehow demeaning?
Precisely, Avni, alright. What we're trying to tell you here is, Avni, that your idea is flawed simply because when you come up to me and tell me that Savita Bhabhi at this point is only having sex with people for her pleasure, alright, but then you go ahead and tell me that she's still having sex with Ashok, alright. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you've already conceded that she's not getting any sexual pleasure from Ashok, yet she's still having sex with Ashok to retain this marriage, alright, you're basically going back to the 17th century idea of how women are only supposed to have sex with their husbands to preserve their marriage, alright, to make their husbands happy, alright. And we find this extremely problematic, and I'll explain this theme, ladies and gentlemen, because we tell you that Savita Bhabhi is not only having sex for her pleasure, alright. The moment you bring in this boss who she's sleeping with to retain her job, and who's keeping her simply because he believes that Savita's only qualification is giving great head, alright, we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because this is further re-entrenching societal stereotypes about women in workplaces, alright. We tell tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that Savita Bhavi at multiple occasions has been displayed to sleep with the professors to get passing grades, alright? Has been displayed to sleep with friends to cheat, alright? Has been displayed to sleep with her boss to give him head so that she can keep her job, alright? And we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because this is perpetuating the societal stereotype about women being women having certain stereotypical roles which they're supposed to portray in society as secretaries, nurse, basically subordinates to the male protagonist of the play, alright? And secondly, about how women and their worth in the professional front can only be evaluated by virtue of how good or bad their blowjob skills are, alright? And we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because everything else about Savita Bhavi at this point is subdued by her sexual skills, and that happens to be, and that is displayed to be her only skill in the first place, alright? Now, why is it that we have this entire concept, why is it that we have an entire problem with the entire concept of Savita Bhavi? And it's not just because Avni's like Avni's trying to tell us that it's because she's a promiscuous woman, alright? We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it's not incidental, alright? That this woman is displayed to be displaying no consent in terms of who she sleeps with and no choice in terms of who she sleeps with, alright? In terms of the unrealistic bodily proportions which are displayed, alright? In terms of how she is continuing to stay in an unhappy marriage and how she's covertly having sex with multiple men outside her marriage, and if she is so sexually liberated as Avni would like us to believe, why is it that she's not doing this overtly, alright? And we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, alright? We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it's not an incident of choice, but it is a representation of the male fantasy, alright? And we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because if any of these if any of these things individually existed, alright, we won't have a problem with it per se, alright? Because we're not here to pass a moral judgment or a value judgment, alright? What we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, our problem lies with this incidence, with this conglomeration of these facts existing in the first place, right? About her having unrealistic bodily proportions, which go out,
okay, so when Savita Bhavi, in addition to this conglomeration of facts, also has sex with women from whom she gets no job advances and who she completely challenges heteronormativity with, what does this tell you?
See, this is what happens when you're single for 5 years. I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that Savita Bhavi has sex with this woman in this said episode that Karthik's tried to dictate to her on the behest of her boss, alright? Who wants her to keep her job, alright? And Vinil there in the audience agrees with me because that is the case, alright? We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem with her being objectified or identified as the woman next door, alright? Simply because she's nothing like the woman next door, alright? And it's not by virtue of the characteristics or one characteristic she has, alright? But the coincidental, or Avni would like us to believe, a conglomeration of characteristics that she has as a promiscuous woman who is got these unrealistic body proportions, alright, and who is going to go and have sex with anything that moves, alright. We find this problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a male fantasy which is being represented as the girl next door, alright. And the fact of the matter is, and this is re-entrenched in the graphic section of the novel, when you see the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, in each and every situation, alright, Savita Bhavi is said to wear, is shown to wear this Mangal Sutra and the thing on her head, alright? And we find this extremely problematic, ladies and gentlemen, because the graphic designers are consciously trying to capitalize on this tabooed sexual male fantasy that exists in the man of Indian society, alright? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to capitalize on it by showing Savita Bhavi as the male fantastic girl next door, or a woman next door, who is now in her full gear, alright? Still part of her marriage, alright? Wearing a Mangal Sutra and everything, alright? Is going out behind her husband's back and having sex with these men, alright? And we find this extremely problematic because I've shown you that this is not because she is getting sexual pleasure or solely because she's getting sexual pleasure, because the moment you have episodes which display her having sex with her boss to retain her job, the moment you have episodes where she has a casting couch to win a beauty pageant, you tell her that even in her physicality and her individual physicality, she is not sufficient, but to compensate for, to even accentuate her unrealistic bodily proportions, she still has to have sex with a beauty contest judge, alright? Now we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the entire concept of phallocentric displayer of Savita Bhavi, alright? We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the graphic imagery of this comic becomes extremely important at this point, alright? And this is why I want to spend like a minute on this, alright? We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that even though Savita Bhavi almost always is the seductress of anything that walks through her door, alright? The fact of the matter is that after sex is initiated, alright, expressions like, oh God, why did I get into this? Oh my God, that is so big, I did not expect this, I did not sign up for this, alright? Show this lack of, show this lack of consent of sorts, alright? Of how she's eventually displayed as the victim in this case, where she's screaming, where she's like lying in the bed and being penetrated by the man, alright? And being the passive person in the bed, alright? And this we find extremely problematic, and this can further be like substantiated by the fact that in no episode, and like Karthik will substantiate this, that no episode she receives oral. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
See, the problem that the feminist movement faces is that one, people don't realize that women want to come out and display their sexual activity, and two, that women themselves are afraid of coming out into the open, right? And which is why Ria is not really willing to acknowledge the fact that she knows about Savita Bhavi, and all of their team is doing is like blaming one person in this room for having explicit knowledge about this thing, right? We think that's really problematic because we think it's part of a larger picture in which individuals are not necessarily ready to accept, right, that they know things, stuff like this. And we'll also try to see about how this knowledge and awareness ties into your basically your general like status in the society in terms of other relationships as well, right? But firstly, let's set this debate into perspective, right? What are they arguing? Both sides are agreeing that yes, we want the liberation of women and we want women to be like assert their identity and authority, right? So what is the alternative that they're providing? They're telling you that okay, we think there are certain stereotypes that exist in society, there are certain male fantasies, right? Now if you go ahead and display yourself as pandering to these male fantasies, that is bad, right? We don't think that that is necessarily the case, right? We believe that once you just necessarily restrict your choices to the extent by saying that no, we can't make these particular choices because we think if we make these choices, these are buying into like popular like narrative that goes against us. We think that is the problem, right? On the other hand, sit down, we think side opposition has given you like an affirmative set in which we actually go ahead and challenge all these notions, in which we challenge all these existing stereotypes against us. And we think Savita Bhavi has been doing that, right? And we don't necessarily buy everything that Arka just said, right? No, just sit down, right? Before that, what does Arka come up and tell us, right? Okay, why does she not leave Ashok and why does she not overtly like display everyone that she's going out and having sex, and therefore why not ditch this institution of marriage? We believe that this entire idea of super liberation that they're trying to propose is also quite problematic, right? Because we don't think that women must be allowed, expected to make this limited choice in which they just stick to one person for sexual support and emotional support, and as if that one person is not able to fulfill them in every which way, they have no way of staying out of the marriage and they must necessarily not make that choice, right? We don't think they're justified to that, right? We think it's buying the same kind of narrative again, right? And like again, this entire idea that look, she has sex with Ashok and look, it's because okay, yeah, she's married and she's obligated to. We don't think that's true, right? We think this woman keeps waiting like all the time because she really likes her husband. She keeps calling him when he's in office that look, dude, come back home, I'm waiting for you, because she necessarily seeks like emotional support from him, right? And we don't think it's a problem that she has sex with him as well, right? The problem is that he can't satisfy her and therefore she's forced to go outside, right? We really don't think it's a problem here, right? We believe that she should be allowed to make all these choices on her own, right? And just because she's promiscuous and just because she has multiple partners is not necessarily the ground to opt this. We think that yes, say like certain aspects of her will be critiqued, right? The idea of why she does go ahead and commit adultery, but we think that the larger benefit that she's providing us of a woman who's capable of asserting her identity and like basically telling people what she likes and what she doesn't like, which she does, is a much greater benefit, right? No, sit down. Also, again, this entire idea of look, okay, boss, you have sex to retain your job, professor, you have sex to like pass tests. We don't think that's necessarily true, right? We believe that okay, in certain cases she does use her body to get advantages, and it does use she's open to go ahead and get favors and tell people that look, you will give me something in return. But we believe that the larger narrative that she's presenting is much different, right? In which we believe in the larger picture she's actually making all of these choices, right? In which, for example, like 5 people at the workplace are actually pursuing her. She's going ahead and having sex with just one person, right? We believe that she's capable of making all of these choices, right? We believe she's capable of turning down people, which is why she doesn't have sex with just any kind of like person who's selling like chole kulcha at a door. We see that she's able to limit her choice to this, right? We also see her turning down teenage boys and things like that because we understand that she appreciates all, like she understands who she wants to have sex with and who she doesn't, right? We think this asserting of your identity is something that is important, not right now, right? Again, this entire idea of like unrealistic body proportions. Arka, do listen when Avni is speaking, right? We've already told you that there exists an alternative within the same narrative, right? We believe that she has a friend and this friend is not being forced to have sex with her on the boss's behest. We believe it's someone that she goes to gym with, she has kitty parties with her, right? She's indulging in all these lesbian relations as well, right? So she's not necessarily pandering to this male fantasy that you're telling time, right, and the stereotypical notions of the men on top. We think that she's exploring alternatives like things like lesbianism and other things like that. We believe she's already like capable of making all these choices, right? And moving on, right, again, this entire idea of like buying male fantasy because she's a passive woman. Firstly, we've already clashed with that. We don't think that she's passive. We believe she goes out and asks people to have sex with her, and also she gets oral pleasure from the Reddit. See, the point is that she is challenging her husband, right? She's challenging the social institution of marriage. Male fantasy isn't that you go ahead and actually see people going ahead and challenging you, right? Male fantasy is subservience to you, right? So, with the fact when she goes ahead and challenges her husband's authority and does all of this is not necessarily pandering to male fantasy. We believe she's challenging all of these notions that exist in society. We think that's important to go on.
Sir, are you okay with rape being shown in pornography?
See, we think it's a completely different thing, right? We're not okay with rape being shown because it again forces those stereotypes of heteronormative things and people being forced to have sex. But we've already created a distinction of how that is not the case with Savita Bhabhi, right? We think the fact that she's going ahead and having multiple partners of her own choice, the fact that she's willing to say no to other people because we think that necessarily a certain amount of choice that she has. That the fact that she's also able to say no, we think all of that is a lot more important, right? We believe that the fact that she can do this assertion that shows us that look, this person is capable of doing it, right? So what have been our constructives, right? And I'll just tell you why we did this debate, right? Essentially, the idea of why opposing it is bad in the first place, right? We believe when you go ahead and as the feminist movement actively oppose this and also opposes on the grounds that these people give you, that look, it's pandering to stereotypes of male fantasy. We believe that you strengthen this entire right-wing narrative that already exists in society. We believe that you strengthen this rhetoric that says that look, women in the workplace can't be promiscuous, women can't display cleavage, women can't have multiple sexual partners. We believe when as the feminist movement actively opposes this kind of display of agency by women, it necessarily hampers them in the long run. We believe that you necessarily strengthen all of these opposition that exists to women coming out in the first place, right? Moving on, right? And this entire idea of why it is important, for us to challenge all of these institutions that exist, right? We believe that see, this is what we need to do, right? The existing porn narrative, this is what it seeks to achieve, right? You to some extent you go ahead and portray all these unrealistic body images because you understand that you necessarily want to get an audience in the first place, right? And that is why the idea of Savita Bhabhi is good because she's been able to build a fan base, right? Which is why we capitalize on this and promote the entire narrative that we're trying to present through this entire idea of female porn, right? But we necessarily strengthen the porn narrative in which we tell people that look, the only people that you see indulging in all these sexual acts are not just Western people, right? These are people who are, as they tell us, necessarily people who live close to you, right? These are people who are necessarily similar to you in terms of race, in terms of culture, and that people within your own country and people around you should be able and capable of going ahead and displaying their institutions, right? We necessarily told you how Savita Bhabhi is an agent that is able to dictate choices. We tell you how she's someone who's been able to assert what is right and wrong for her. We also told you how going ahead and opposing this is necessarily bad because you're doing it just on the grounds of already existing opposition. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of voting issues, this debate is not a difficult one to thematize, right? And there are two very simple things that this board asks you to do. One, for both sides, is for us to tell you why opposing something is really, really bad. Okay? And on the other hand, to tell you why promoting it is really, really great. We think the reason that side proposition have conclusively lost this debate is because they've given us zero engagement on the first front. We've constantly come up and told you about reasons why the feminist movement taking such a stance ties into a larger narrative that's hugely debilitating to the kind of stance that's taken so far. And we've received no engagement on that. We've talked to you about larger ideas of the promiscuous woman, being not sanskari and therefore being Western, and the idea that promiscuity therefore is something that will always remain distant from Indian society. They have not told you why they think that they can somehow combat all of these issues while coming up and saying Savita Bhabhi is a terrible thing and as the feminist movement we condemn her. They haven't given you a model, they haven't told you how precisely they're going to phrase this other than saying we'll put it in this magazine where we earlier said something else, right? Sure you will, but how are you going to phrase it such that it does not look like the condemnation that we've conclusively proved for you it is, right? And we tell you this debate isn't one about not taking a stance. They cannot come up here and say promotion is bad and therefore we win this debate. They also need to come up and prove to you why they have to actively oppose it and how that's going to help our cause, and they fail to do so. We think they lose. But let's look at other themes in this debate, right? We think the problem with their stance is the problem with a larger idea of a limited feminism that excludes a lot of people and excludes a lot of choice when its basis is being pro-choice and allowing abuse. Because look at the questions they've asked us and look at the case they've cemented for you from the very first speech. It's been one of, why doesn't she just leave her marriage, yeah? Then why does she have to be covert about it? Why does she still love him, yeah? This is the thing. We don't think this is hyper-liberal feminism is the only way to go. Karthik tells you that it's okay for her to stay with a man who maybe sexually isn't satisfying her if she thinks that emotionally he does, right? We think that's an okay choice for her to make in this scenario. We think it's an okay choice for her to make, to have sex with a lot more people than other people do. And we do not think condemning these kind of choices promotes a kind of feminism that is fair to women, because it tells you that my way or the highway is the policy according to which we judge you. And we don't think as a feminist movement we can levy this kind of judgment on people. Let's talk about the arguments we've made for you in terms of why promotion is good. We've told you that this woman next door idea is something that Savita Bhabhi brings attention to. The idea that the Indian woman can be sexually active, right? That the Indian woman can go up to a certain man and demand sex, that she can have sex with her kitty party friend, right? That she can make these decisions is necessarily challenging the norm. And let's talk about this male fantasy, right? Of course we think there are certain things that are problematic about Savita Bhabhi. We don't think any narrative ever can be seen to be truly unproblematic by everybody, right? But here's the thing, does she simultaneously do a lot of things that really threaten men? And the answer to this is yes, because she has sex with other women, right? She has sex and does not obey her husband, right? She goes ahead and decides to have sex with a lot of men where she's on top and they're going down on her. We don't think these are things that the Indian man fantasizes about while he's jacking off. We think this is something that makes him look weak. The woman on top is not something that is a male fantasy, and we think she constantly questions these kind of choices with the things that she does. We've talked to you about the fact that a fan base is important in terms of the kind of reach that your movement has and the kind of message that your movement has. In such a scenario, we think Savita Bhabhi has gained critical mass in terms of the kind of support that is gained in the public, and we think therefore it's a great forum in which to promote this idea of this powerful woman who is not subservient, right? We tell you, of course, that we want to incentivize a certain kind of porn, and when as a feminist movement we enter this sphere and say this is great, we can incentivize alternatives to come up. We've told you also that the idea that critique does not exist is ridiculous, because of course we can ally with certain people while simultaneously critiquing them. We think that they have not satisfied half of their burden. We think we have told you by promoting this strong, powerful woman is a good thing to tap us.
Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is not about exactly the language in which we're going to tell people that Savita Bhabhi is good or bad, right? Various interpretations will exist. The manner in which they say, hey, it's not about the cohesive idea of Savita Bhabhi or exactly every event or every single character in Savita Bhabhi, but people are only going to look at, hey, promiscuous woman who's owning it, hey, she also happens to be Indian, right? We think there will always be a scope for people to be able to interpret Savita Bhabhi in either progressive or regressive ways. And what our side is telling you, as long as the packaging is such that it can propose and propagate certain regressive things, we will not appropriate her as a mascot, right? The moment they come up and say, hey, we have a problem with rape, right? We tell you that rape in pornography also buys into certain male fantasies, right? And hence there are certain male fantasies that should be opposed by the feminist movement because they are not fair to women, right? They are forcing us into the spectrum that, hey, she's promiscuous, you can't let that go, right? We're not passing a moral judgment on her promiscuity. What we're saying is that this eliminates the scope for consent, and I'll get to that in a moment, right? But they are forcing us into the spectrum of, hey, either she can be frigid or she can be very licentious. Why don't you bank upon this, right? We think this is not something that necessarily helps reality in the first place, because hypersexualization is objectification being determined by male fantasies, and hence we have a problem with that, right? We tell you that because this is a graphic novel, right, it has a certain trajectory, it has a back context, right, and all of those things will also affect readers. So they cannot come up and argue and say, hey, we're only going to look at the fact that, hey, she's very happy being promiscuous, hey, brown women also have sex, right? We think that as long as there are other things that are problematic, right, for them, they think it's incidental that her body type is something that's necessarily typified and necessarily idealized. It's incidental that she's having sex with her boss and professors for certain incentives, but the fact that she's having sex with a female friend is something carefully deliberated upon. We don't think they can argue on such slimy grounds by saying these choices are deliberated, readers are going to accept these, other choices are incidental, readers are going to ignore these. We don't think they can win this debate on that, right? We think the moment you introduce incentives there, right, we think it becomes problematic because sexuality is the only thing she's banking upon. She's not living a full life in the first place. This is not to say that sex is bad. This is to say women can be more than sex, right? We think the other extreme of the stereotype is something that we're trying to tackle, right? Incidentally, her sex when she actually has sex with men is also something that's not very different from like sex where men are dominant and men are more aggressive and women are passive, right? We don't see how they're going to like debate this by saying all of these things will be ignored by readers. Let's also talk about consent, right? When your criterion of selecting a sexual partner is no criterion, where you're not exercising any alternative choice whatsoever, we don't think the concept of consent exists. If you say yes to everybody, what is the parameter of consent? So if consent is not being exercised in this graphic novel, it does not necessarily highlight the idea of consent and how women should have the ability to be able to consent to sex. Therefore, we don't think it's doing much for the feminist movement. And lastly, should we just bank upon the popularity of Savita Bhabhi because it happens to be popular? We're telling you, a majority male audience that appreciates this reading because it's packaged in these socially regressive ways, because it's packaged in ways that cater to this their fantasies, does not make it a good enough reason for us to go and actively promote it and enhance the readership with all of the politically incorrect baggage that comes in this particular graphic novel, right? Just because they're saying, hey, this is a woman who's okay with asserting her identity, we don't think it's doing much for the feminist movement simply because it's scandalously titillating for men who think that such women next door should exist, right? We think that is also a stereotype, and women need to break away from both these kinds of stereotypes of either being frigid sanskari women or being a slutty Savitri and not a sati Savitri. And hence we're extremely proud to